The penthouse of Alistair Sterling was a testament to glass, steel, and indifference. It floated above the city like a private constellation, each polished surface reflecting a sky that belonged only to him. For Elara Vance, the space had a different field. It was a collection of surfaces to be cleaned, echoes to be ignored, and ghosts to be navigated. Her presence was functional, like that of a high-end appliance, and that was exactly how Sterling treated her. Elara moved through the vast living area with an economy of motion that belied the complexity of her thoughts. She had once been a linguistics prodigy, on a full scholarship for a PhD program, able to deconstruct dead languages from fragments of pottery. But a family crisis had shattered that path, forcing her into a world where her intellect was a liability, something to be hidden lest it offend. Now, instead of translating ancient Sumerian texts, she translated the smudges on Sterling's floor, to ceiling windows into pristine clarity. Sterling, a man whose tech empire was built on an app that turned photos into cartoons, saw people in similarly simple terms. You were either useful to his ambition or you were furniture. Elara was decidedly furniture. He never spoke to her, only at her. The study, next. There's a spot on the marble. Don't dust the awards too loudly. This afternoon, the silence of the penthouse was broken by the angry, staccato sounds of a video conference. Sterling was pacing in front of a massive screen, his face a mask of crimson frustration. On the screen, an older Japanese gentleman, Mr. Kenji Tanaka, watched him with an expression of weary patience. Between them, in a small window, sat two interpreters Sterling had hired for a fortune, both looking flustered and out of their depth. What do you mean? Or evaluate the spirit of the agreement? Sterling barked, his voice echoing off the minimalist DA core. It's a contract, not a seance. The first interpreter, a young man with panicked eyes, stammered, Sir, he is saying, there is a feeling of disharmony in the feeling. A feeling is costing me $100 million. Sterling threw his hands up in disgust. Elara continued her work, wiping down a chrome and leather chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She was a master of being unseen, of blending into the background. She understood more than any of them knew. She had heard the interpreter's clumsy, literal translations, missing every honorific, every subtle cue, every ounce of subtext. They weren't just mistranslating words, they were butchering respect, turning a negotiation into an insult. Sterling's tirade continued, his voice rising with every failed attempt at communication. He was a bulldozer trying to perform surgery. Finally, after a particularly pointed comment from Mr. Tanaka that left his team speechless, Sterling spun around, his eyes wild with fury. They landed on Elara, who had just finished her task and was standing quietly by the wall, waiting to be dismissed. He saw her, but he didn't see her. He saw a maid, a silent observer, and in his rage, he needed a target. A cruel, mocking smirk spread across his face. You're always lurking, he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Standing there with that blank look on your face, acting like you understand any of this. He took a step toward her, enjoying the sudden focus of the entire call on this bizarre new drama. You think you're so smart, he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He jabbed a finger toward the giant screen where Mr. Tanaka sat watching, bewildered. Fine, you tell me what he just said. Go on, translata. The command hung in the air, thick with malice and ridicule. Sterling's interpreters stared, half horrified and half relieved the attention was off them. Sterling himself stood with his arms crossed, a triumphant sneer plastered on his face, waiting for the humiliation to land. He expected her to stammer, to shrink, to apologize for her very existence. Elara did none of those things. For a brief second, the world seemed to slow down. She felt the sting of his contempt, a familiar ache she had learned to compartmentalize. But this time, it was different. It was public. It was a challenge, and deep within her, the scholar she had been forced to bury began to stir. She placed her microfiber cloth neatly on the arm of the chair she had just polished. She straightened her back, not in defiance, but with the innate posture of someone assuming their proper authority. She took 2 steps forward, her gaze lifting from the floor to meet Mr. Tanaka's on the screen. And then, she spoke. Her Japanese was not the textbook, stilted version the interpreters had used. It was flawless, formal, and flowed with the natural cadence of a native speaker. The tone was one of profound respect, embedding the very honorifics and polite forms Sterling's team had trampled over. She first apologized to Mr. Tanaka on behalf of the household for the display of disrespect he had just witnessed. Then she addressed his last point. "Tanaka-sama," she began, and on the screen, the old man's eyebrows shot up. "You said, a bridge built without a soul cannot bear the weight of a true partnership. You were not speaking of feelings, but a foundation. You fear the foundation of this merger is built on disrespect and transactional greed, not on mutual understanding and shared honor." She paused, then turned her head slightly toward Sterling, though her eyes remained on the screen. "He is not rejecting the deal," she said, her voice now a cool, clear English. "He is telling you that you have failed to show you are an honorable partner worthy of his company's legacy." The silence in the penthouse was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the air from everyone's lungs. Sterling's jaw had gone slack, his sneer dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His interpreters looked like they had seen a ghost. On the screen, Mr. Tanaka leaned forward, his wariness replaced by a sharp, intense curiosity. He bypassed the interpreters completely and addressed Elara directly in a rapid, complex stream of Japanese, asking her a nuanced question about strategic alignment and corporate philosophy. Without missing a beat, Elara replied, matching his level of formality and intellectual depth. A brief but clearly profound exchange took place, a conversation happening on a plane no one else in the room could access. Finally, Mr. Tanaka fell silent. He looked past Elara, his gaze finding the stumps of Alistair Sterling. When he spoke, it was in crisp, clear English for everyone to hear. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice firm, "I am prepared to walk away from this negotiation right now. My final offer is this: we will continue discussions on one condition." Sterling, still struggling to process what had just happened, could only manage a weak, "What condition?" Mr. Tanaka's eyes flicked back to Elara. "All further communication, from this moment forward, will be handled exclusively by this woman. She will be your sole translator and liaison. Otherwise, there is nothing more to discuss. But choice is yours." Alistair Sterling was a man who detested losing control. Now, control had been wrested from him by his maid in front of a potential nine-figure business partner. With the deal hanging by a thread, his pride warred with his greed. He agreed to Mr. Tanaka's terms. The next 24 hours were a blur for Elara. She was pulled from her duties, her simple uniform replaced by a hastily purchased, ill-fitting pantsuit. She was ushered into the gleaming, sterile environment of Sterling's corporate headquarters, a world she had only ever seen from the outside. The transition was jarring. One moment she was invisible, the next she was the focal point of every high-stakes conversation. She navigated the initial awkwardness with the same quiet confidence she had shown in the penthouse. In the meetings, she was more than a translator, she was a bridge. She didn't just pass along words, she decoded intent, clarified cultural missteps, and subtly guided Sterling's brutish negotiation style into something more palatable for Mr. Tanaka's team. The deal, which had been on life support, was suddenly breathing again. Sterling watched her with a toxic cocktail of emotions. He was grudgingly reliant on her, yet every success she achieved felt like a personal humiliation. He couldn't fire her. Mr. Tanaka had made that clear. But he could try to put her back in her place. The antagonism was subtle, a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts. His executives, taking their cue from him, would forget to send her the meeting agenda. They would use hyper-specific corporate jargon in their pre-meetings with her, trying to trip her up. Sterling himself took a more direct approach. "Listen," he'd say, pulling her aside before a call. "When I say we're aggressively pursuing synergy, I need you to translate it as an offer that cannot be refused. I want them to feel the pressure." "McSteeter, Sterling," Elara would reply calmly. That phrasing would be interpreted as a threat and would be deeply dishonorable. It would end the negotiation. Her refusal to be his puppet only deepened his resentment. He and his CFO, a nervous man named Davies, began having hushed, frantic conversations when they thought she was out of earshot. But what Sterling didn't realize was that a lifetime of being overlooked had turned Elara into an exceptional listener. Her linguistic skills weren't just about speaking, they were about understanding the unsaid. She could pick out the whisper of a lie in a crowded room. During a break in one marathon session, she walked past a glass-walled conference room and saw Sterling and Davies inside, their backs to her. Their voices were low, but the panic in their tone was sharp. "But Tanaka's people do real due diligence," Davies was saying, his voice thin. "They won't," Sterling hissed back. "They're trusting her. Just make sure the primary ledger is the only one they see. We just need to get this across the finish line before they find out." "Find out what?" Elara wondered. "The primary ledger." The conversation was a discordant note in the symphony of the negotiation. It was a clue, and the scholar in her knew she had to follow it. Elara's role as liaison granted her unprecedented access. To facilitate the final stages of due diligence, Sterling's IT department gave her a login to their secure data room, a digital vault containing the financial guts of his empire. His team had carefully curated the folders, ensuring Mr. Tanaka's accountants would only see a rosy picture of growth and profitability. They assumed Elara was just a linguistic conduit, incapable of understanding the complex financial data she was handling. It was a colossal miscalculation. Late one night, long after the executives had gone home to their comfortable lives, Elara sat in a small, borrowed office, the glow of the monitor illuminating her focused expression. She methodically reviewed the documents cross-referencing figures and statements. Everything looked perfect. Almost too perfect. Her attention was drawn to a sub-folder deep in the archive, labeled Legacy Data, Decommission. It was filled with what looked like corrupted files, gibberish to the untrained eye. Sterling's tech team had likely seen the garbled text and dismissed it as junk from an old server migration. But Elara saw something else. It wasn't random code. It was a pattern. The corruption was, in fact, text. Specifically, it was an older, highly specialized Japanese accounting code known as Kansai Kiri, used almost exclusively by companies in the Osaka region 2 decades ago, the very region where Mr. Tanaka's parent company had been founded. Sterling's team, in their arrogance, had hidden their secrets in a language they didn't even recognize as a language. Her heart began to pound. Using her laptop, she began the painstaking process of translation. This was not the polite, honorific-laden language of negotiation. This was the cold, hard language of numbers. She wasn't just translating words anymore. She was translating a company's soul. The story that emerged from the decoded files was horrifying. Sterling's company wasn't just struggling, it was a hollowed-out shell. The impressive growth was a fiction, propped up by phantom assets and shell corporations. The company was hemorrhaging money, teetering on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. The merger wasn't a partnership. It was a desperate, fraudulent attempt by Sterling to offload his mountain of debt onto Mr. Tanaka's reputable firm before the whole house of cards came crashing down. Elara leaned back in her chair, the silence of the office pressing in on her. She held the truth in her hands. She had the power to detonate a bomb in the middle of a multi-million-dollar deal to ruin Alistair Sterling completely. The man who had laughed at her, who had tried to humiliate her for sport, was now utterly at her mercy. The weight of that power was immense. This was no longer about personal vindication. It was about preventing a crime and protecting an honorable man from ruin. She had to expose the truth, but the timing and the method had to be perfect. The final board meeting was held in Sterling's most ostentatious conference room, a space designed to intimidate. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the executives. Alistair Sterling sat at the head, radiating a smug confidence. He believed he was moments away from pulling off the greatest deception of his career. He looked at Elara, seated beside him, with a look that was almost proprietary, as if she were the final, clever tool he had used to secure his victory. Mr. Tanaka and his team appeared on the large screen, the formal signing documents ready on their end. The pleasantries were exchanged, translated with perfect precision by Elara. Sterling delivered a final, grandiose speech about shared futures and mutual success, a mountain of lies that Elara conveyed in neutral, professional tones. And so, Sterling concluded, picking up his expensive pen, I believe all that's left is a signature. But Mr. Tanaka did not pick up his pen. Instead, he looked intently into the camera, his gaze finding Elara. Elara-san, he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Before we proceed, I would value your assessment. You have been the bridge between our two worlds. You have seen both sides with clear eyes. As a final act of translation, what is your professional assessment of the integrity of this partnership? Every eye in the room swiveled to her. Sterling's smile tightened. He expected a simple, positive platitude. He had underestimated her one last time. This was the moment. Elara took a slow, deliberate breath. She did not look at the screen. She turned her body slightly to face Alistair Sterling, her expression unreadable. Mr. Tanaka, she began, her voice calm and steady, her English ringing through the silent room like a bell. My final translation is not of words, but of truth. Sterling's face began to fall, the blood draining from it as he realized what was happening. The integrity of this partnership is a complete fabrication. Elara continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. I was granted access to your full financial archives, Mr. Sterling, including the legacy data your team dismissed as corrupted files. It wasn't corrupt. It was written in Kansai Kiri accounting code. She saw the flicker of sheer panic in the CFO's eyes. I have translated the real ledger of this company, Elara announced to the entire room. This company is not profitable. It is on the verge of bankruptcy, carrying catastrophic debt that has been deliberately and fraudulently concealed. This is not a merger. It is an attempt to deceive an honorable man and offload a dying company. She finally turned to the screen, and looking at Mr. Tanaka, said, My professional assessment is that this deal is built on a foundation of lies, and I cannot, in good conscience, be a party to it. The exposure was absolute, but silence was shattered by Sterling leaping to his feet, his face purple with rage. She's lying. It's absurd. She's the maid. But it was too late. The quiet authority of Ayer's revelation was infinitely more powerful than his sputtering rage. Mr. Tanaka's face was like stone. He said 2 quiet words in Japanese to an aide, and on his side of the screen, the signing documents were swept away. The call ended. The deal was dead. In the ensuing chaos, as security was called to handle a screaming Alistair Sterling, Elara simply stood and watched the empire of a petty tyrant crumble into dust. In the aftermath, Mr. Tanaka flew to the city. He didn't come to salvage the deal, but to make a new one. He met Elara not in a boardroom, but in a quiet cafe. Your integrity is rarer than your linguistic skill, Elara-san, he told her. Both are priceless. He didn't offer her a job as a translator. He offered her a senior executive position, a role as a cross-cultural advisor and strategic lead for his company's new, legitimately structured American division, which would later acquire Sterling's few viable assets out of bankruptcy. He wasn't giving her a reward. He was placing a uniquely qualified mind where it belonged. And so, Elara Vance's journey from an invisible housekeeper to a respected executive serves as a powerful reminder that true worth and intelligence cannot be measured by one's position or silenced by another's prejudice. Integrity is a language everyone understands eventually. If this story of resilience and the fight for justice stirred something in you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring narratives about people who turned adversity into triumph. What was the most impactful moment for you?